strip of fabric, and there's a seam. So if her neckline is round like this, the seam is just going to be round but kind of parallel to that. So it's going to go. Now does this placket go through the collar stand? Do you see my little intersection there? Does it go through? It ends, right? So I actually don't want this little bit here. The sewn part of the placket is going to stop at the collar stand. And on the other side, what's happening? So the seam is ending at the collar stand, but the opening, what's happening with the opening? It's going around. It's like a quarter of a circle, right? So when the opening reaches, it's not just going to keep going straight up or end. It's going to curve to meet the center front neck. You seeing that? And depending on how you drew your collars, some people draw their collars more or less vertical, and others draw their collars more spread out. Depending on the space you have, that little gap between your collars, you may or may not see that little curve. But if you have room for it, put it in there. Okay? So once we have the collar stand in there, it's actually really easy to place our button. It's just centered, since this is 1 inch, it's halfway, and it's going to be on center front. Okay? So all the vertical lines of your cross marks for the button, they're all going to be on the center front line. How many buttons do we have in between? 3 additional buttons. Okay? So if I measured from the center between each one, oh, and there's one at the bust line. Any idea why? Anyone ever wear a shirt that doesn't have a button at the bust line?
Open.
Yeah, it just gaps right there. Okay, so it's usually on purpose that we put one around the bust level, around the waist, at the neck. Those are structural support places, right? But I'm going to say these buttons probably are the same exact space between each one. And if I measured this, okay, what's quarter scale of 3 5/8? Like, who wants to do that math? Right? It's not fun math. So instead of doing math, if I know where, I'll just pretend here's my waist. I don't have it on a croquis. If I know where my neckline button is, and I know where my waistline button is, if I take this plus and fold it to meet this plus, I'm using the light as kind of my own little personal light box. If I put a little crease here, so if I folded this to this, it would tell me this one, right? No math. Okay, so then I'll give myself a little plus there. If I fold the bust to the collar one, it'll give me that one. And if I fold the waist to the bust, okay, it'll give me that one, and I don't have to do math. Right? Is that a good plan? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's my shortcut for button placement manually. I actually even do that in pattern making classes rather than like coming up with exact measurements. I figure out where I want the top one, I figure out where I want the bottom one, and I fold all the time to evenly distribute stuff. On the computer, there's just a button, evenly distribute, and it'll just put them all right where you want them to go. You place the top, you place the bottom, and just say, evenly distribute, and it'll make it perfect. And then you don't have to deal with crazy like 30-second and inch fractions and stuff. All right, so buttons, placket. Do you see any stitching on this shirt? Edge stitch. So what's the difference between an edge stitch and a top stitch? Is an edge stitch a top stitch? Has anybody not heard edge stitch before? What is that? Edge stitch. What does it sound like?
That's on the edge.
Yes, stitching right next to the edge. So edge stitch is a special kind of top stitch so top stitch is any stitching you see on the outside. Edge stitch is when it's right near an edge. So if I look at the collar, I see stitching along the edge of the collar. So there's edge stitch on the collar. If I look at the placket, I see edge stitching along the edge of the placket, and I even see edge stitching along the seam of the placket. So we've got stitching, stitching, stitching all over here. We have a hem. What kind? 1/4 inch top stitch. So it's just a regular stitching hem. It's not a blind hem with dots. Okay. Looks like we've got some edge stitch on the collar stand also. So you're going to go through and add your stitching wherever your stitching would go. Okay. Would there be stitching up here?
No.
No, why? It's just the folds, right? But we do have stitching going down this side. We have stitching going down this side. I'm not going to go all the way down. You'll go all the way down. And then we've got stitching along the hem. So this isn't an edge stitch. This is a top stitch down here.